Hello, YouTubers, friends, compatriots, bootlickers, shows, desolates, hearts, peasants, vassals, meat sacks, pink slime, Chechens. I'm a useful idiot. And I want to talk about Chechnya, because now we have this focus on Chechnya, and it's rather surprising, because we have these two Boston bombing so-called terrorists / criminals who have this connection to Chechnya. And I thought everyone would just see it for what it was, a pure coincidence. But it turns out there's been a 2.5-hour congressional hearing about militants and extremists in Chechnya. And I find this very perplexing because I don't think there's really any Chechen nationalism involved necessarily in this event. And even if there was by these two individuals, to think that there's now an impending threat from Chechen and Russian Muslims, it's rather peculiar, particularly in light of our history with the extremists in Chechnya. And as usual, I want to give a bit of history to Chechnya, but I'll get to the stream of history of Chechnya to catch Americans up on a country they know little about, other than the fact they've been involved in being repressed by trying to get independence from Russia, and also the fact that Chechen rebels have carried out some very heinous terrorist acts. But I'll get to that later. One of the reasons I find this whole alarm in the United States all of a sudden about Chechnya is because, once again, this is going to sound like a very familiar story. Because in 1985, the National Security Directive number 166 under Ronald Reagan, President Ronald Reagan, to arm the Muhajadeen to fight the Soviets in Afghanistan, in the Afghan invasion. And interestingly enough, by 1987, 65,000 tons were being sent to Afghanistan by the U.S. every single year. And there was over 100,000 Afghan fighters. And among those recruited by the CIA, here we go again, just like Osama bin Laden. Among those recruited by the CIA was Chechen leader Shamil Basayev. And he even set up a base in Chechnya to train Mujahideen fighters to be sent into Afghanistan, as well as fighting there himself. And so the U.S. financed this. And the U.S. financed to create covert operations to destabilize the new Russian Federation after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So once again, we see this fragmentation, destabilization, and breakup that the U.S. encouraged with the Soviet Union and continued to encourage when the Russian Federation was created. And they helped finance covert operations in all those regions of the Soviet Union that broke away, and some that didn't, like Chechnya. And Pakistan and Saudi Arabia did the financing and the weapons for the Chechen rebels that were being sent to Afghanistan, as well as the CIA. And there was actually 35,000 Chechen fighters in Chechnya. And so this is why, once again, I'm surprised that our government talks in these respects. I can't imagine that our congressmen like McCain, are they really that much out of the loop when they talk about not knowing that we're arming terrorists in Libya, or we're arming terrorists in Syria, and now talking about militancy in Chechnya that we financed and encouraged to grow all these many years. And it will become more apparent as I talk more about Chechen history. Let me get to that now. So Chechnya is a small country, northern Caucasus Mountains, and three little Islamic regions there are provinces: Chechnya, Dagestan, and Circassia. They all kind of struggle for independence, and they battled Russian imperial rule for over 300 years. And in fact, in 1877, Imperial Russia killed 40% of the Chechen population, and 400,000 Churkas were also expelled. But in 1877, Imperial Russia killed 40% of the Chechen population. And interestingly enough, Chechnya became part of Russia because they won it in the Russo-Persian War. Let's see where my notes are on that. Oh, the territories of Georgia and Chechnya were transferred to Russia from Persia or / Iran as a result of the 1804 to 1813 Russo-Persian War. So interestingly enough, that territory originally came from Persia, now known as Iran, and then became part of the Russian Federation. And interestingly, when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Chechens wanted independence like all the other countries. And this was in 1991. And the Russians balked because all the other regions, of course, have been incorporated into Russia artificially, and the Russians felt that Chechnya was a traditional part of Russia because it had been for so long, 300 years. And so under President Yeltsin, Russia invaded Chechnya in the first Chechnyan War from 1994 to 1996. And 100,000 Chechens were killed, and the Russians even used carpet bombing. And one thing I want to point out is that this is a country of a little over 1.5 million. So when I take out these figures of 100,000 Chechens killed, it's a staggering figure in relation to their population. In fact, when you see all the facts about the history of the Chechens, it's quite a tragedy, what's befallen these people. So you shouldn't judge them too harshly. So anyway, then Chechen leader Dudayev was assassinated, and they got virtual independence. But then there was a second Chechnyan War. Russia invaded again in 1999 to 2000. That was and another 100,000 Chechens were killed. And this was in response to some terrorist acts, including the one everyone remembers from the Beslan school in Russia, 300 Russian school children killed. And that was a very horrible thing. But, you know, here we go again. For them and other people in that region, they are freedom fighters. And to Russia, they are terrorists. To us, they are terrorists. And that's just how it goes. But I certainly don't condone that act at all. It was one of the most brutal things I've ever seen in my life. And that's saying something. So in actuality, between 1991 and the collapse of the Soviet Union to 2010, a quarter of the Chechen population has been killed in Russian occupation. And this has precedence. And as a matter of fact, when Stalin came to power, he divided Chechnya into these other regions. And in 1937, he had over 14,000 Chechens murdered. And then by the end of the war in 1944, as revenge, because he felt like he had to divert badly needed resources fighting Chechen resistance rather than have them in Stalingrad to face the Germans. So in 1944, Stalin ordered the entire Chechen population shipped to camps in Siberia. And this is a genocide that a lot of people don't know about. And the fact that there's a Chechen population today is rather miraculous. And overall in the Soviet Union, there's about 2.5 million Soviet Muslims and that were killed by Stalin. And I think there's 20 million total in Russia today. But 2.5 million Soviet Muslims killed by Stalin. So another genocide that people don't talk about. And then it turns out that these Chechen rebellions have been pretty regular. Every time Russia suffered internal strife, the Chechens would once again rise up. And they rise up during the Russo-Turkish War. They rose up during the Russian Revolution of 1905. They rose up again during the Russian Revolution of 1917. And they rose up during the Russian Revolution. And in 1956 was the first time this was under Khrushchev, the Chechens were actually allowed to return to their homeland, and that's when their population resumed. And so this is how it goes. And interestingly enough, go back to the big picture in 1991 when the Soviet Union collapsed, 15 republics that or provinces that made up the Soviet Union nearly turned into 80. There were so many independence movements in all the ex-regions of the Soviet Union that, like I've discussed before, all the big countries that we see all throughout the Soviet Union now all want to break down into smaller parts and fragmentation. And ultimately, that'll probably be the U.S. policy, is to try to continue to fragment all the ex-Soviet republics into their smaller components. So 15 Soviet republics nearly turned into 80. I think we've ended up with probably 20 or 30. I don't really have the number off my top of my head. So so there we go. There's a little background on Chechnya. So we have a tangled connection with this country, as in so many other situations in American foreign policy, very complex and very fickle. And CIA and multiple American administrations and presidents and military operations have been supporting this militancy and extremism in Chechnya for quite some time. And so now it's interesting to see the American government act like they don't know that. And so let's not judge Chechnya too harshly in light of their long 300-year struggle. I'm a useful idiot. Don't you be one too.